In a faraway part of the galaxy, where stars burned faintly and planets drifted like lonely islands in an endless sea, a cry for help echoed through the void. The Vaylith, an alien race known for their advanced technology but troubled history, sent out a desperate signal. Their world was dying, not from natural disasters or cosmic events, but from something far more sinister. A biological weapon, unleashed during their own civil war, had spiraled out of control. It spread like wildfire, consuming life wherever it touched. Their cities were crumbling, their people falling ill by the millions, and their leaders were powerless to stop it. The message traveled across light years, reaching countless civilizations. Some ignored it, too busy with their own affairs. Others dismissed it as a trick, knowing the Vaylith's reputation for cunning and deceit. But one group took notice: the United Galactic Fleet, UGF, Earth's newly formed interstellar military force. Commanded by Admiral Kyung-Soo, a man whose calm demeanor masked a sharp mind and unshakable resolve, the UGF had been established to protect humanity's interests in space. Though still young, they had already proven themselves capable of handling crises both small and large. When the distress call reached Earth, it landed on the desk of Admiral Kyung-Soo. He sat in his office aboard the flagship EOS, staring at the holographic projection of the message. The words were simple, yet chilling. "We need medical aid. Our species is dying." There was no mention of battleships or reinforcements, just a plea for help. Kyung-Soo leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. Something about the request didn't sit right with him. Why would such a technologically advanced race ask for help from humans? And why now? He called for Lieutenant Hye-jin, his communications officer, to join him. She arrived quickly, her short black hair neatly combed and her uniform crisp. Hye-jin was young compared to most officers, but she had earned her place through sheer brilliance. Her ability to decode even the most complex signals made her invaluable to the fleet. When she entered the room, Kyung-Soo gestured for her to take a seat. "What do you think?" he asked, nodding toward the hologram. Hye-jin studied the message carefully before answering. "It seems genuine, sir," she said slowly. "But there's something strange about the metadata. Let me run a deeper analysis." Kyung-Soo nodded. "Do that. In the meantime, we'll prepare a response. Gather Captain Ji-hoon and meet me in the briefing room in 30 minutes. Captain Ji-hoon was another key member of the team. Unlike Hye-jin, who preferred logic and precision, Ji-hoon relied on instinct and experience. A veteran of several skirmishes along Earth's borders, he had little patience for diplomacy and even less trust in alien motives. Still, his tactical skills were unmatched, making him an essential part of any mission. By the time Hye-jin and Ji-hoon joined Kyung-Soo in the briefing room, she had uncovered some troubling details. "Sir," she began, pointing to a series of numbers flashing on the screen, "these coordinates don't match the location of the Vaylith homeworld. They seem to point to other areas within their territory." Kyung-Soo frowned. Could they be decoys? Or perhaps backup sites for storing supplies? "It's possible," Hye-jin admitted, "but without further investigation, I can't say for sure." Ji-hoon crossed his arms, his expression grim. "This smells like a trap. We send ships. They ambush us, and suddenly we're fighting a war we didn't ask for." Kyung-Soo considered this. Ji-hoon wasn't wrong. History was full of examples where seemingly innocent requests turned into deadly conflicts. Yet ignoring the call entirely felt wrong. If the Vaylith truly needed help, turning away could doom them, and potentially put Earth at risk if the disease spread beyond their borders. "We'll proceed cautiously," Kyung-Soo decided. "We'll assemble a small fleet disguised as a humanitarian convoy. No heavy weapons, just enough firepower to defend ourselves if necessary. Our goal is to assess the situation and determine whether their claim is legitimate." Both Hye-jin and Ji-hoon nodded in agreement, though Ji-hoon looked less than thrilled. "Understood, sir," he said, "but if things go south, don't expect me to hold back." "Noted," Kyung-Soo replied dryly. "Now let's get moving. Time is of the essence." Over the next few days, the fleet prepared for departure. Supplies were loaded onto cargo ships, medical teams briefed on potential hazards, and pilots drilled on emergency protocols. The EOS served as the command vessel, its massive hull gleaming under artificial lights. From the bridge, Kyung-soo watched as smaller ships docked and undocked, their movements precise and efficient. Finally, the day of departure arrived. As the fleet entered hyperspace, Hye-jin couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She spent hours poring over the Valith signal, searching for hidden clues or patterns. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon roamed the corridors of the EOS, checking on crew members and ensuring everyone was ready for whatever lay ahead. Days passed in relative silence. The journey to Valith space was long but uneventful. Then, just as they approached the edge of the system, alarms blared throughout the ship. Hye-jin rushed to her station, her fingers flying over the console. "Sir!" she called out. "I'm picking up multiple contacts ahead. They're not responding to hails." Kyung-soo stood up straight, his eyes narrowing. "Magnify the view." On the main screen, dozens of ships appeared, their designs unmistakably Valith. They weren't alone. A sprawling network of satellites and defense platforms surrounded the planet below. Whatever awaited them, it was clear that the Valith were prepared for visitors. "This doesn't look like a welcoming committee," Ji-hoon muttered, gripping the railing tightly. "No," Kyung-soo agreed. "It doesn't." As the fleet moved closer, tension mounted. Every crew member knew that the next few moments would decide their fate. Would the Valith honor their promise of peace, or would they reveal their true intentions? Only time would tell. For now, all they could do was wait and hope that their caution wouldn't prove futile. The human fleet hovered at the edge of Valith space, their ships small and unassuming compared to the massive alien armada waiting for them. Admiral Kyung-soo stood on the bridge of the EOS, his sharp eyes scanning the view screen. The Valith ships were sleek and angular, their metallic surfaces reflecting the dim light of a distant star. They looked more like weapons than vessels, each one bristling with cannons and energy turrets. It wasn't the sight of a civilization begging for help, it was the posture of a species ready for battle. "Sir," Lieutenant Hye-jin said from her station, her voice calm but tinged with unease. "They're hailing us." Kyung-soo nodded. "Put it through." A holographic image flickered to life in the center of the bridge. Standing before them was Trelka, the Valith ambassador. His tall, slender frame was covered in shimmering robes that shifted colors as he moved. His face was elongated, with wide-set eyes that glowed faintly blue. He raised a hand in what might have been meant as a gesture of peace, but his expression was cold and unreadable. "Humans," Trelka began, his voice smooth yet mechanical, translated through advanced communication devices. "We welcome you to our system. Your arrival brings hope to our people. Please land immediately so we can begin distributing your medical supplies." Kyung-soo didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied the ambassador carefully. There was something off about him, something calculated in the way he spoke, as if every word had been rehearsed. The admiral glanced at Hye-jin, who gave a subtle shake of her head. She hadn't detected any falsehoods in the transmission, but that didn't mean there weren't hidden layers beneath the surface. "We appreciate your hospitality," Kyung-soo finally replied, choosing his words carefully. "However, before we proceed, we need to ensure the safety of our crew and supplies. We'll maintain orbit while conducting preliminary scans of your planet." Trelka's glowing eyes narrowed slightly, though his tone remained polite. "That won't be necessary. Our facilities are secure, and time is critical. Every moment you delay costs lives." Kyung-soo felt a pang of guilt at the mention of lives being lost, but he pushed it aside. This mission wasn't just about compassion, it was also about protecting Earth and its allies. "I understand the urgency," he said firmly, "but protocol dictates caution. We'll deploy drones to assess the situation first." Before Trelka could argue further, the hologram disappeared, leaving the bridge silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Kyung-soo turned to Captain Ji-hoon, who was leaning against the wall near the main console. "What do you think?" the admiral asked. Ji-hoon shrugged, his arms crossed. "I think they're hiding something. That guy gives me the creeps. That makes two of us," Kyung-soo muttered under his breath. Turning back to Hye-jin, he added, "Deploy the drones. Let's see what they're not telling us." Minutes later, several small drones shot out from the Eos and descended toward the Valith homeworld. Through the view screen, the crew watched as the machines zipped past towering spires and crumbling buildings. The planet below was a mix of beauty and decay. Shimmering domes housed sprawling cities, but many structures were blackened and broken, their walls scorched by fire or collapsed entirely. Streets were eerily empty, save for the occasional figure moving slowly, likely too weak to do much else. Hye-Jin monitored the drone feeds closely, her fingers flying over the controls. Suddenly she froze, her eyes widening. "Sir, look at this." On one of the screens, a group of Valith soldiers dragged what appeared to be prisoners into a large facility. The captives were gaunt and frail, their bodies marked with lesions and strange discolorations. One stumbled and fell, only to be kicked violently by a guard. Hye-Jin zoomed in, her stomach churning at the sight. "These don't look like victims of a biological weapon, they look like test subjects." Kyung-Soo clenched his jaw. "Record, everything. If this is what they're doing to their own people, we need proof." As the drones continued their sweep, they picked up even more disturbing images. Factories churned out vials of green liquid, which were then loaded onto cargo. Ships, troop transports lined runways preparing for deployment. And deep underground, vast networks of tunnels hinted at secret operations far beyond anything the Valith had admitted to. While the drones gathered data, Hye-Jin worked on decrypting intercepted transmissions between Trelka and another faction. Within the Valith government, the messages were heavily encrypted, but she managed to piece together fragments. What she discovered sent a chill down her spine. "Admiral," she whispered urgently, pulling Kyung-Soo aside, "this isn't just about their civil war. They've been using the bioweapon to destabilize neighboring civilizations. 2 other species have already been wiped out. They're planning to blame us, to make it look like humanity spread the disease." Kyung-Soo's blood ran cold. "Are you sure?" She nodded grimly. "The evidence is clear. They lured us here, to use us as scapegoats, or worse." Kyung-Soo took a deep breath, trying to process the implications. If Hye-Jin was right, the stakes had just skyrocketed. This wasn't a simple humanitarian mission anymore. It was a potential interstellar conflict. But he couldn't act rashly. He needed confirmation, and he needed a plan. When Trelka reappeared on the view screen, demanding an explanation for the drones, Kyung-Soo decided to confront him directly. "Ambassador," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room, "we've observed some troubling activity on your planet. We were promised a peaceful exchange of medical aid, yet we see signs of hostility and experimentation. Can you explain this?" Trelka's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of irritation in his glowing eyes. "Your drones are violating our sovereignty," he said coolly. "We invited you here to help, not to spy. If you refuse to cooperate, we will consider your presence an act of aggression." Kyung-Soo met his gaze without flinching. "And if we leave? Will you let us go peacefully?" There was a long pause before Trelka responded. "You came here claiming to offer aid. Leaving now would betray that promise and endanger countless lives." It was a thinly veiled threat, and everyone on the bridge knew it. Ji-hoon stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. "With all due respect, sir," he growled, "this smells like a setup. We should get out while we still can." Kyung-Soo held up a hand to silence him. "We're not leaving yet," he said firmly. "Not until we know the truth." As the hologram faded once again, the bridge fell silent. Hye-Jin returned to her station, frantically analyzing the data she'd collected. Ji-hoon paced back and forth, muttering curses under his breath. Kyung-Soo stared at the view screen, watching the Valith ships circle like predators. For now, they were safe. But for how long? The humans had come expecting gratitude and cooperation. Instead, they found themselves caught in a web of lies and danger. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The Valith were not the helpless victims they claimed to be. And the humans were no longer just observers. They were players in a deadly game they hadn't chosen to join. The tension aboard the Eos was thick enough to cut with a knife. Admiral Kyung-Soo stood on the bridge, his sharp eyes scanning the monitors as Lieutenant Hye-Jin worked tirelessly at her station. The drones had returned with damning evidence. Images of the Valith's experiments, recordings of their sinister plans, and maps of hidden stockpiles filled with the deadly bioweapon. Each piece of information painted a clearer picture. The Valith weren't victims begging for help. They were predators luring prey into their trap. Kyung-soo turned to Captain Ji-hoon, who leaned against the railing near the main console, his jaw tight and fists clenched. "We can't ignore this," the Admiral said quietly. "They've already destroyed 2 species. If we don't act, more will follow." Ji-hoon nodded grimly. "I agree, sir. But what's the plan? We're outnumbered, outgunned, and sitting? Ducks up here." Hai-jin looked up from her screen, her face pale but determined. "Sir, I've been analyzing their ship designs. There's a pattern. All their vessels rely on centralized command hubs to coordinate attacks. If we could disable those hubs, it would cripple their ability to fight back." Kyung-soo raised an eyebrow. "How do you propose we do that?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "We'd need to get close. Too close. Fighter craft, armed with EMP bursts, might be able to take them out, but it's risky. They'll see us coming." Ji-hoon straightened up, his expression lighting up with grim excitement. "That's the kind of mission I like. Dangerous, but doable. Let me lead the strike teams." Kyung-soo considered this for a moment. Ji-hoon was reckless, yes, but he was also one of the best tactical minds in the fleet. If anyone could pull off such a daring operation, it was him. "All right," the Admiral said finally. "Prepare the fighters. But remember, speed is key. We hit hard and fast, then retreat before they can regroup." As Ji-hoon hurried off to assemble the strike teams, Hye-jin approached Kyung-soo, her voice low and urgent. "Sir, there's something else. While I was decrypting their transmissions, I found coordinates pointing to multiple locations outside the Valith system. Those must be where they're storing the bioweapon. If we don't warn the galaxy, they'll spread it further." Kyung-soo nodded, his expression grim. "We'll deal with that after we survive this fight. For now, focus on keeping our fleet safe, and keep trying to broadcast warnings to nearby systems. Even if only a few hear us, it could make a difference." Hours later, the human fleet prepared for battle. The Eos remained in orbit, its weapons primed and shields fully charged. Below them, the Valith ships continued to circle like vultures, their glowing engines casting eerie reflections across the planet's surface. Kyung-soo watched from the bridge as Ji-hoon led a squadron of fighter craft out of the hangar bay. Each ship was equipped with modified EMP devices designed to overload the Valith command hubs without causing permanent damage to the surrounding area. "Good luck," Kyung-soo murmured under his breath as the fighters disappeared into the void. On board one of the lead fighters, Ji-hoon gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white. He glanced at the other pilots in his squadron, their faces tense but focused. "Remember the plan," he said over the comms. "Stay low, move fast, and don't stop until the job's done." The Valith didn't react immediately. Their sensors likely registered the small group of fighters as insignificant compared to the massive fleet still in orbit. By the time they realized the humans' true target, it would be too late. As the strike team approached the first command hub, a massive structure floating just above the atmosphere, Ji-hoon gave the order. "Now!" The fighters unleashed their EMP bursts in perfect synchronization. Bright flashes of energy erupted around the hub, followed by a cascade of sparks as its systems overloaded. Within seconds, the once mighty command center went dark, its connection to the rest of the fleet severed. Cheers erupted over the comms as the pilots regrouped and moved on to the next target. But the Valith weren't idle for long. As the strike team attacked the second hub, dozens of enemy fighters swarmed toward them, their cannons blazing. Ji-hoon cursed under his breath as he dodged incoming fire, his ship rocking violently from near misses. "Stick together," he shouted. "Don't let them split us up!" The battle raged on, a chaotic dance of light and sound. Explosions lit up the darkness as both sides exchanged blows. One by one, the humans managed to disable several more command hubs, throwing the Viglith forces into disarray. But the cost was high. Several fighters were lost, their pilots disappearing into the void without a trace. Ji-hoon gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay focused. There was no time for grief. Not yet. Back on the Eos, Kyung-soo watched the battle unfold with growing concern. The strike team had succeeded in crippling the Valith fleet's coordination, But the enemy still outnumbered them. Dozens of cruisers began closing in on the human ships, their weapons trained on the Eos. "Raise shields to maximum," Kyung-Soo ordered, "and prepare countermeasures." Hee-Jin worked feverishly at her station, her fingers flying over the controls. She had managed to send out a partial warning to nearby star systems, but the message was weak and fragmented. The Valith's jamming signals made it nearly impossible to broadcast clearly. Still, she refused to give up. "Almost there," she muttered to herself. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. "Incoming torpedoes!" someone shouted. Kyung-Soo braced himself as the Eos shuddered under the impact. The view screen flickered, showing plumes of fire erupting from the hull. "Damage report," he barked. "Minor breaches on decks 3 and 5, came the reply. "Shields holding at 60%. "We can't take much more of this," another officer added nervously. Kyung-Soo clenched his fists, his mind racing. They needed reinforcements, and fast. But there was no way to call for help without exposing their position even further. Just as despair began to creep in, Hee-Jin's voice cut through the chaos. "Sir, I've cracked their encryption. I can broadcast. The full warning now." "Do it," Kyung-Soo said without hesitation. "Let the galaxy know what the Valith are planning." With a final keystroke, Hee-Jin activated the transmission. The message blasted across the stars, bypassing the Valith's jamming signals. Thanks to Hee-Jin's ingenious coding, it contained everything: the intercepted transmissions, the drone footage, the coordinates of the bioweapon stockpiles. Every nearby civilization capable of receiving the signal would now know the truth about the Valith. As the message spread, the tide of the battle began to shift. Neighboring species, outraged by the Valith's betrayal, mobilized their fleets to join the fight. Ships poured into the system from all directions, their weapons trained on the Valith. What had started as a desperate mission for survival had become a galactic alliance united against a common threat. Ji-Hoon and his strike team returned to the Eos, battered but victorious. As he climbed out of his fighter, he saluted Kyung-Soo with a weary grin. "Mission accomplished, sir. The Valith are blind and leaderless." Kyung-Soo nodded, though his expression remained grave. "Good work, Captain. But this isn't over yet. Not by a long shot." Through the view screen, they watched as the combined forces of humanity and its newfound allies surrounded the Valith fleet. The aliens tried to fight back, but without their command hubs, their efforts were disorganized and ineffective. One by one, their ships fell, either destroyed or forced to surrender. For the first time since arriving in Valith space, Kyung-Soo allowed himself a small smile. They had exposed the truth, rallied allies, and turned the tables on their enemies. But as he gazed at the burning wreckage of Valith ships, he couldn't shake the weight of what they had uncovered. This wasn't just a victory, it was a warning. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and humanity's place within it was far more fragile than anyone had imagined. Still, for now, they had won, and that was enough. The battle above the Valith homeworld raged on, a swirling storm of fire and light. The human fleet, though battered, held its ground alongside the newly arrived allied ships from neighboring civilizations. Together, they formed a massive blockade, trapping the Valith forces between their own planet and the advancing armada. But despite the odds tipping in their favor, Admiral Kyung-Soo knew this fight was far from over. The Valith still had one card left to play, their ultimate weapon. On the bridge of the Eos, Kyung-Soo watched as Lieutenant Hee-Jin worked tirelessly at her station, monitoring the enemy's movements. Her face was pale but focused, her hands moving quickly over the controls. "Sir," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with urgency. "They're powering up something big. It's an orbital platform, one we didn't detect before." Kyung-Soo frowned, stepping closer to her screen. Sure enough, a massive structure was rising from behind the planet's horizon. It looked like a giant ring, its surface bristling with energy conduits and weapon emplacements. At its center glowed a pulsating core, radiating waves of unstable energy. Whatever it wasn't meant for defense. It was a weapon designed to destroy on a catastrophic scale. "What do you know about it?" Kyung-Soo asked, his tone calm but firm. Hee-Jin hesitated, scanning the data rapidly. Based on intercepted transmissions, I think it's a dispersal device. They plan to launch the bioweapon into orbit and spread it across multiple star systems simultaneously. If they succeed, the entire galaxy could be infected. Kyung-soo clenched his jaw. How much time do we have? Not long, Hye-jin replied grimly. They'll need at least 10 minutes to charge the core. After that, it's just a matter of firing. Kyung-soo turned to Captain Ji-hoon, who stood nearby, his arms crossed and his expression grim. We can't let them activate that thing, he said. Any ideas? Ji-hoon thought for a moment, then nodded. I've got one. We hit it hard. And fast. Send fighters straight into the core. If we can plant explosives deep inside, we might be able to blow it apart before it fires. It's risky, Kyung-soo said, his eyes narrowing. Those fighters won't stand a chance against the defenses around that platform. I know, Ji-hoon admitted. But if we don't try, everyone loses. Besides, I've got a trick or two up my sleeve. Kyung-soo studied him for a moment, then gave a curt nod. All right, assemble your team, and make sure you come back alive. Aye, sir, Ji-hoon said with a faint smirk. He turned and hurried off the bridge, shouting orders into his comms as he went. Minutes later, a squadron of fighter craft launched from the Eos, streaking toward the orbital platform. Ji-hoon led the charge, his ship weaving through bursts of enemy fire as the Valith scrambled to defend their weapon. Behind him, a dozen pilots followed, their smaller vessels darting like insects around the massive structure. As they approached, the platform unleashed a barrage of missiles and energy beams, forcing the humans to split up and take evasive maneuvers. One by one, several fighters were hit, their pilots screaming over the comms as their ships exploded in fiery bursts. Ji-hoon gritted his teeth, pushing his craft to its limits. He couldn't afford to lose focus. Not now. Stay close, he shouted into his comms. We're almost there. Finally, the squadron reached the outer shell of the platform. Using EMP bursts, they disabled sections of the shielding, creating narrow openings just wide enough for their ships to slip through. Ji-hoon took the lead, guiding his fighter into the heart of the structure. Inside, the air was thick with tension as alarms blared and sparks flew from damaged machinery. Plant the charges, Ji-hoon ordered, his voice tight with urgency. Make sure they're set to detonate on my mark. The pilots fanned out, attaching explosive devices to critical points within the platform. Each charge was linked to a timer controlled remotely by Ji-hoon's ship. Once planted, all they had to do was get clear before triggering the explosion. But escaping wouldn't be easy. The Valith had anticipated their move and sent waves of drones to intercept them. Ji-hoon's fighter rocked violently as enemy fire pounded his shields. Come on, he growled, dodging another missile. We're not done yet. Behind him, the other pilots fought valiantly, covering each other's retreat as they made their way back toward the exit. One pilot, a young woman named Su-min, stayed behind to hold off a swarm of drones, buying the others precious seconds. Her ship exploded moments later, but not before she transmitted a final message. Go! Finish the mission! Ji-hoon clenched his fists, forcing himself to keep moving. There would be time to mourn later, if they survived. By the time he reached the edge of the platform, the core was nearly fully charged. Its glow pulsed brighter with each passing second, casting an ominous light across the battlefield. Ji-hoon glanced at the timer on his console. 10 seconds, 8, 6, get clear, he shouted into the comms. Detonation in 3, 2. He pressed the trigger. The explosion ripped through the platform, tearing it apart in a blinding flash of light. Chunks of debris tumbled into space, while the glowing core collapsed inward, consumed by its own instability. For a moment, everything seemed frozen, the silence deafening as the shockwave rippled outward. Then came the cheers. Back on the Eos, Kyung-soo exhaled sharply, his shoulders sagging with relief. On the view screen, the remnants of the platform drifted lifelessly, its threat neutralized. The Valith fleet, already weakened by the earlier strikes, began retreating en masse, abandoning their positions to regroup elsewhere. Well done, Kyung-soo said quietly, addressing the crew. You've saved countless lives today. Hye-jin smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Su-min gave her life for this, she murmured. We owe it to her, and to everyone else, to finish what we started. Kyung-soo nodded solemnly. Agreed. Let's secure the area and begin cleanup operations. The galaxy needs to see that justice has been served. As the surviving ships moved to mop up the remaining resistance, Kyung-soo allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. This mission had tested them in ways he hadn't anticipated. They had faced betrayal, loss, and overwhelming odds, but they had also forged alliances, uncovered truths, and proven humanity's strength. Still, the cost weighed heavily on his mind. Every victory came at a price, and this one had been no exception. For now, though, they had won. And in doing so, they had changed the course of history, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. The final battle was over. The Valith homeworld lay quiet beneath a sky filled with drifting debris, the remnants of their orbital weapon, shattered ships, and broken dreams of conquest. The human fleet, battered but victorious, gathered in orbit alongside its newfound allies. Together, they had achieved what once seemed impossible, stopping the Valith from unleashing their deadly bioweapon on the galaxy. But as Admiral Kyung-soo stood on the bridge of the Eos, he knew that true peace would require more than just military victory. The view screen displayed a panoramic view of the system. Allied ships from various species floated side by side, their crews cheering and exchanging messages of gratitude. For many of these civilizations, this marked the first time they had worked together against a common enemy. The humans, once seen as newcomers to interstellar politics, were now hailed as heroes. Their actions had not only saved countless lives, but also forged bonds that might reshape the future of the galaxy. Kyung-soo turned to Lieutenant Hyejin, who sat at her station, her face pale but resolute. She had spent hours ensuring the warning signal reached every corner of known space, detailing the Valith's crimes and exposing their plans. Now, she leaned back in her chair, exhaustion evident in her slumped posture. "How are you holding up?" Kyung-soo asked gently. "I'll be fine, sir," she replied, forcing a small smile. "It's just Soo-min and the others shouldn't have died. They didn't deserve it." Kyung-soo nodded solemnly. "No one deserves to lose their life in war, but their sacrifice won't be forgotten. Because of them, billions will live." Captain Ji-hoon entered the bridge, his uniform scorched and his face streaked with soot. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was a sense of satisfaction in his stance. He had returned from the orbital platform mission alive, though the weight of those who hadn't made it home lingered in his eyes. "All clear below, sir," he reported. "The last of the Valith forces have surrendered." "What's next?" Kyung-soo gestured for Ji-hoon to join him near the view screen. "We need to secure the remaining stockpiles of the bioweapon. If even a single vial escapes, the threat isn't truly gone." Ji-hoon frowned. "That could take weeks or months. Are we staying here that long?" "No," Kyung-soo said firmly. "We'll coordinate with the Allied fleets to handle cleanup operations. Our job is done here. Once we've handed over control, we'll head back to Earth." As the crew began organizing the transition of authority, Kyung-soo addressed the entire fleet via comms. His voice carried both pride and sorrow as he spoke. "Today we faced an enemy unlike any we've encountered before. They sought to destroy us, not through brute force but through deception and manipulation. Yet despite their schemes, we prevailed. We exposed their lies, rallied allies, and stopped their weapon from spreading. You should all be proud of what you've accomplished." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But let us never forget the cost. Lives were lost. Brave men and women who gave everything to protect others. Their courage must guide us moving forward. Let this victory remind us that cooperation and trust are stronger than fear and division. Humanity has earned its place among the stars, but with that comes responsibility. Protecting the innocent, standing against tyranny, these are the values we fight for." When he finished speaking, the bridge fell silent. Even Ji-hoon, usually quick with a sarcastic remark, remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the floor. Hyejin wiped away a tear, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her console. Though the mission was complete, the emotional toll was far from over. Days later, the Eos prepared to leave Valith space. The Allied fleets had taken charge of securing the planet and dismantling the remaining weapons caches. diplomatic envoys, arrived to begin negotiations with the surviving Valith leaders, who now claimed ignorance of the conspiracy. Whether they were telling the truth or simply trying to save face, no one could say for certain. As the Eos entered hyperspace, heading back toward Earth, the mood aboard the ship shifted. Exhaustion gave way to reflection, and conversations turned to memories of those who had been lost. In the mess hall, crew members shared stories about their fallen comrades, laughing through tears as they remembered moments of kindness, bravery, and humor. Ji-hoon joined them briefly, listening silently before retreating to his quarters. Even he, hardened by years of combat, found solace in remembering the sacrifices of others. Kyung-soo spent much of the journey alone on the observation deck, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. He thought about how far humanity had come since its first steps into space. Once isolated and vulnerable, Earth was now part of a vast network of civilizations, bound together by shared struggles and triumphs. This mission had proven that humanity wasn't just capable of survival, it was capable of leadership. Hyejin joined him eventually, carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee. She handed one to Kyung-soo and sat beside him, her legs crossed awkwardly in the low gravity. "Do you think we made the right choice?" she asked after a while. Kyung-soo took a sip of his coffee, savoring the warmth. "What do you mean?" "I mean, coming here in the first place, risking everything for a species that lied to us. Was it worth it?" Kyung-soo set his cup down and looked at her. "War always forces us to make difficult choices. Could we have ignored the distress signal? Yes. Would that have been easier? Probably. But if we had, we wouldn't have uncovered the truth. And the Valith might have succeeded in destroying entire civilizations, including ours." Hyejin nodded slowly. "I guess I just wish it hadn't cost so much." "So do I," Kyung-soo admitted. "But sometimes doing the right thing means paying a price. That doesn't make it wrong." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars blur past as the ship traveled faster than light. Each star represented a world, a culture, a story, waiting to unfold. Humanity's role in that tapestry was still being written, but one thing was clear. The events of this mission would shape the future for generations to come. When the Eos finally returned to Earth, it was greeted as a hero. News outlets broadcast images of the battered yet triumphant fleet, hailing its crew as saviors of the galaxy. Parades were held, speeches delivered, and medals awarded. But for Kyung-soo, Hyejin, and Ji-hoon, the accolades felt hollow compared to the lessons they had learned. At a ceremony honoring the fallen, Kyung-soo addressed the crowd. "This victory belongs not just to us, but to everyone who stands for justice and unity. It reminds us that when we work together, there is no challenge we cannot overcome. But let it also remind us of the cost of complacency. The galaxy is vast and unpredictable. We must remain vigilant for ourselves and for those who cannot defend themselves." As the crowd applauded, Hyejin glanced at Ji-hoon, who stood stiffly beside her. For once, he didn't roll his eyes or mutter under his breath. Instead, he stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Maybe, she thought, he understood. Now. Maybe they all did. The mission had changed them, all of them. It had tested their courage, their loyalty, and their humanity. And though they had emerged victorious, they carried scars that would never fully heal. But in those scars lay strength, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine through. As the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Kyung-soo walked away, pausing only to look up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, among the stars, new challenges awaited. But for now, humanity had earned a moment of peace, and that, he realized, was enough.